Hello, everyone. My name is Nuno, and this is the Reform Review. Thank you for being here with us. I do want to at least just mention that this week's show will be a little bit short. We do not have too many changes in terms of reform updates, so that will be definitely short. But I do want to talk a little bit more about President Biden's new budget proposal because it does include quite a bit on the immigration front, and it does really reflect his current view of priorities for immigration reform going forward. But to start, as usual, we do like to cover some more topics of the news. We have two different stories. One is a follow-up to last week involving the public charge rule, and the other one is about allegations of abuse in migrant facilities in Texas and an ongoing investigation. But before we really start, if you're new to this and you're watching on Facebook, definitely make sure to like our page. Or if you're here watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Now, to start, I do want to, again, talk about the public charge rule. We mentioned this a week ago, I believe, that Republican states have been continuing different lawsuits against the Biden administration to revive certain Trump-era policies. This one happens to be one of them. And if you're not too familiar with the public charge rule, that's okay. It was a Trump-era policy which punished immigrants who would use or would be likely to use public benefits. This includes Social Security, food stamps, different kinds of welfare services. Now, if you remember, the Biden administration dropped their lawsuit, which began under the Trump administration. And at that point, since the Biden administration did not support it, they just decided to let it die. Because of that decision, the public charge rule was essentially ended, not formally by an order from the president as of this point. And in response to this decision by the Biden administration, 14 Republican-led states decided to sue and try to intervene and bring back the public charge rule, essentially rolling us back to a Trump administration policy. Now, the result of this, this past week, it was on April 8th, so very, very recent. A federal court in California ruled, and this was more of a panel decision, so it's only 3 people who voted. The ruling was 2-1, so 2 in support of blocking this intervention and only 1 person in support of it. And because of this decision, it means that the public charge rule for the time being is dead. It will continue to no longer take effect. So we are very safe and we're very thankful for this, because if this ruling were to go in favor of the public charge rule and were to be re-implemented, we would be seeing that this public charge rule would affect the lives of between 382,000 to 544,000 legal immigrants a year. And that's the important thing to mention about this. These are Republican-led states fighting for a rule that would punish immigrants who came here legally, who are trying to just live their life here in the way that they always advocate for. The reason why they fight so hard against undocumented immigrants, they say, is because they came here the wrong way and they're trying to take advantage of the system. And yet immigrants who come by, play by the book, play by the rules as they say, are also being punished by the same party who believes that they should have the right to be here and to really enjoy the American life. And so what this would have done would be to deny them permanent residency green cards later on in their immigration process. So again, we're very thankful that this happened, that it was struck down. Well, it wasn't really ruled on. It was just to see whether or not these states even had legal standing to intervene. Thankfully, it ruled in favor of our side. And so we should not be seeing the public charge rule in effect anytime soon. Again, a lot of these Republican states will sue over everything. They're taking great pride in trying to block and obstruct as much progress as possible. So will this be dead forever? My opinion, probably not. We will see it come up again in the near future, maybe in a few months. I would not be surprised. But for the time being, we are safe and, again, very thankful that the decision in this came out in our favor. The next story involves Texas. It seems to be a common trend on our show that Texas will always come up every single week for some reason. And I'll share my screen, another article, very quickly. And this will just be more so to walk you through what is happening because, well, it's a little bit complicated, and my feelings on it are also mixed. So let me quickly switch over. This will be a little talking point for later. I'll just quickly read through this story with you. These are the more important details that you need to know. Is that there have been 3 complaints, so 3 reports of that were alleging abuse at a migrant facility in Texas. Now, some of these allegations involve even sexual abuse. They also include allegations that children are not being fed and that those who will test positive for COVID-19 are not being separated from the rest. So, rather serious claims that are being made. We, of course, are no stranger to knowing that a lot of these facilities are not known to treat immigrants well. And it's even more concerning because this is a facility that holds, I believe, 1,600 immigrant teenagers. It's in San Antonio in Texas. It's within the Freeman Coliseum. So this is a repurposed space as an emergency shelter. So if you remember, the Biden administration has really been trying to spawn and create many emergency centers throughout the U.S., really. And so what this is really telling us is that the Republican governor, Abbott, he has really come out against this in the sense that he believes, and I'll pull up the quote here, is that this facility should shut down immediately. The children should be moved to better staffed and better secured locations. Again, a little bit of a strange opinion coming from the Republican governor of Texas, considering not too long ago, meaning last week, we covered another story, or actually 2 weeks ago, perhaps, in one of our previous coverage, we really talked about how he is railing against the Biden administration and claiming that it is that immigrants that are coming are the source of COVID-19 and that really they are a threat to this country. Well, at the same time, he's running a story, an angle of his claiming that he is really fighting for humanitarian reasons and for the best of these children. Now, while I am doubtful of his intentions and I don't believe he's a good faith actor in this, I also do agree. I don't believe that these emergency shelters are as secure as the Biden administration tries to paint them as. We have seen in the past that these emergency shelters, even by law, they're not required to follow the same level of care and standards that a permanent facility would need to follow. And again, I don't advocate creating more permanent facilities. I think that those will just be empty beds that then they feel the incentive to have to fill, especially since the Biden administration has not ended the use of private facilities, private detention facilities, although he has decided to lower the use of private prisons for different crimes, not for the same treatment for detention centers. So that is really my concern. I think that this is, the concern should be, as really the governor said, that we should be finding better situations for these children. Again, I don't agree with the governor on anything else, it appears. But on this, I do agree with him that we need to be able, if these allegations turn out to be true, they need to be handled more effectively and these children need to be moved to where they are safe. Now, I think the root issue is that there's so many children crammed into these small areas over capacity. That is another issue that needs to be resolved in a very quick manner, since even more children are coming to the border along with families as well. So again, this is why I said that this is a bit of a complex issue and conflicting, right? It does make even myself feel different feelings about how this is being handled and who is really profiting from this. As we spoke before, Governor Abbott is really trying to take advantage of this crisis at the border, taking advantage of the suffering of people, along with other Republican representatives who, under the Trump administration, did not shout and scream about the humanitarian violations of human rights that were happening in many of these detention centers. But now suddenly they've grown a heart and a conscience and want to take action, but not in the correct way. They would rather up security, up enforcement, and kick all these people out instead of actually giving them the support that they need to be able to stay in this country where they're really just seeking an opportunity to live a better life. So we are going to see how this pans out. Again, this is just an ongoing topic each week to week. We cover the situation at the border and bordering states because it is important. It does affect our future when it comes to immigration reform. But now with this story out of the way, I do want to take a bit of a turn, right? The description of this talk is really to talk about the Biden administration's new proposed budget, which was really recently sent to the US Congress. This happened yesterday. So this was on April 9th. Biden finally released his budget proposal, which is great. We get to at least see what his priorities are and how the current events, especially at the border, are influencing his perception. Before we get into the actual document, I do want to just slightly cover what the Associated Press mentions here, because it is very important what is left out of the news coverage when it comes to his take on immigration reform. So very quickly, we're going to pull that up. And by quickly, we're just going to search it up. And as you can see here, we're looking at this paragraph in particular, because the framing is what's important, especially when we go into depth on what's actually written inside of the budget. Here, it really just covers the positive, I would say, right? The rosy picture of what's included in this proposal. Well, of course, it mentions the border crisis in the sense of such a high influx of arrivals at the border, and so that they plan on investing $861 million to address the root causes in Central America. So if you remember from the proposal, which then became the U.S. Citizenship Act, the Biden administration has been saying that they want to address the root causes of migration to the U.S., and this seems to be part of their commitment. Once we go into the actual budget, you'll see that this is a bit of a weird situation, because they're saying that they're sending $861 million right now, or would like to if it's approved by Congress, but this is actually part of a 4-year commitment to send a total of $4 billion. So this seems to just be that first step down payment, in a sense, towards a longer 4-year commitment. So this is really what's highlighted here in this article, along with this mention of $345 million, which will go to immigration services, to focus more on these naturalization and asylum case backlog. It's no surprise to us, right, if you're really invested in immigration news and just the state of the immigration system in the U.S., that people are waiting year to year, just for their case to be handled. Well, this is seeking to finally address that backlog, which has been the major complaint of a lot of immigrant advocates. The process of going through naturalization and even asylum, but also in general the immigration courts, which have a huge backlog. I believe we covered in one story where it's over 1 million, if I'm not wrong, of cases that are on a backlog. I'll have to double check that and get those details in the future, but know that these backlogs are a major issue going forward. Now, there's another piece that says that the budget will jump up in terms of hiring new immigration judges. Again, this is going to help with those backlogs. And really, when it comes to what the press is covering, this seems to be the majority. But this is why, at least on this show, we want to go into the actual details of what is really included in this budget. And so I did manage to find a copy of it from the White House. And I really want to just go piece by piece on this. Maybe not scrolling around, because it is a very, very lengthy document, 58 pages, so nothing too crazy. But again, quite a bit of a rundown and breakdown of where all this money is going to, preferably by President Biden. Now, I took some notes of it to really walk you through at least the highlights of this bill. So I'm going to really just leave it at the beginning, and then I'll walk you through the different departments that are relevant to us. As you can see here, it says that it came in April 9th. So to start, we're going to go down the list. And I just want to context this by saying that it is a bit of a mixed bag of different funding, all the way from border security to the immigration courts. So really, we want to start by talking about the Department of Health and Human Services. If you're not familiar with their involvement in the immigration process, and especially what's happening at the border, it's that they help with placing children into more permanent locations right? So once they get processed through the initial phases at the border. Now, the Biden administration is promising some portion of this budget will go to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So that's $4.3 billion will go to the ORR to really, as he says, restore America's promise to refugees. This is going to be used to rebuild the nation's refugee admissions program, which was really gutted under the Trump administration and was weakening over the years. And it will also use this money to work to reunite separated families who are more recent, but also to provide trauma and mental health services to families who were separated under the Trump administration. I'm hoping that these services will also extend to those who have been separated under the Biden administration. I think it would really be a disservice if they only limit it to Trump. That seems more of a politicized approach rather than a more humanitarian approach. So I'm hoping at least that this will be extended to even the Biden administration. Now, the next department we'll talk about, so that was the Department of Health and Human Services, really just focusing on the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Another highlight will come from the Department of Homeland Security, which is going to be receiving a lot of money. So if you thought that 4.3 billion was a lot for helping to revamp the refugee program, the Department of Homeland Security is going to get $52 billion assigned to them. And this covers quite a bit of different areas. I might actually just quickly pull it up here so you can, well, we'll just scroll, but I'm only going to highlight the important pieces because there is some other talk and explanation of where this is going, but really going to focus on what involves the border, because again, that's relevant to immigration reform for us, but also what's going to happen with the backlogs in the naturalization and asylum cases. So to start, the immediate, and again, this is why it's a reflection of the Biden administration's priorities. The first piece that is highlighted here is the need to, as they say, invest in effective and modern border security. And I'll zoom in here so you can see. What this is going to do is it will provide, of the $52 billion, $1.2 billion for border infrastructure. They say that this is modernization of land ports of entry, investments in modern border security technology, and they say efforts to ensure the safe and humane treatment of migrants in their custody. Again, we had to wait to see. This is a budget, and then eventually, when the money is assigned, we will have a sense from each department sending out their priorities and their guidelines on how they're going to effectively use that money. So again, it is very telling that Biden's immediate concern is the border. It is a pressing one that's occurring right now, and really it's going to be something that we can't ignore going forward over these months. The next one to have to recognize is here on the second point, which says it seeks to support a humane and efficient immigration system. What the main takeaway from this big paragraph is that this is going to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, so the USCIS. This seeks to address that naturalization and asylum backlog. This was mentioned in the Associated Press article, and this is where they pulled it from. So the hope is that they will be able to address those backlogs and support up to 125,000 refugee admissions in 2022. I read a different report where it was a bit of question of whether or not this will be possible because they have not even accepted refugees this particular year. So whether or not they're going to hit their 125,000 goal in time for 2022, that's left to be seen. I do hope so, because otherwise that will be a huge promise broken and left behind. So we are going to see what will happen there. Another thing that's interesting is here at the end of this piece, where they are going to proportion $470 million. So this is apparently an additional $84 million from 2021. And what this money will be used for is rather interesting. It's going to be used to ensure that the workforce complaints within the Department of Homeland Security, which include those that are related to white supremacy are investigated. So this is really about the investigation side and trying to hold DHS officials accountable when it comes to their treatment of immigrants going through the system. So this is rather surprising. I didn't expect to see it, but it does seem to follow the recent trend that we're seeing within this administration to support these different initiatives to improve the quality of the immigration system going forward. Whether or not this will be approved is the other question. Again, it's similar to how Biden sent his immigration proposal for the United States Citizenship Act, and yet it kind of blew away, and even the entire Democratic Party in the House and Senate do not support it. So I'm hopeful that this continues to go into the budget, but I won't be surprised if they decide to slash this and instead move that money elsewhere. But we will see what happens. Now, in terms of everything else in the budget for the Homeland Security, it does seem more about cybersecurity, about terrorism. Climate change is also included in here, which is, if you're interested in climate change, I definitely recommend reading their take on this because it is a little bit interesting. But for the purpose of the show, we're not going to really discuss it in detail. And also, as it says here, these last 2 points are about their ability, their capacity when it comes to research and making sure that they're protecting civil rights and civil liberties. So not much else that's really relevant to us. But the next piece involves the Department of Justice. And this is where we shift away from the naturalization and asylum backlog to the immigration court backlog. So people who are going through deportation hearings or being processed to preferably stay within the country. The Department of Justice is receiving $35.2 billion in their budget, so a rather large amount, still less than the Department of Homeland Security. And of the $35.2 billion, really only $891 million, so it's still a good amount, but in terms of percentage of the actual full amount going to the DOJ, only $891 million is going to address this immigration backlog. Again, it is the largest critique and the biggest worry of immigrant advocates of this backlog. It's the reason why the immigration process takes so long, takes so many years, is in part because there's so many cases waiting to be heard. Again, the good part is that of this $891 million, it does support hiring or putting into place 100 new immigration judges to help expedite this process to address the backlog. Is this sufficient? In my opinion, no. 100 new judges definitely won't be enough to address over 1 million immigration cases that are in backlog. So is it a good first sign that the Biden administration is trying to take practical steps to address the core fundamental issues within the immigration system? Yes, I think it is a good first step. What we need to do, though, is, again, comprehensive immigration reform, which addresses the root causes of why we have this backlog in the first place, and then a healthy funding of the system to not only bring in 100 new judges, but bring in more to make sure that we get rid of the backlog and we're able to proactively handle the cases going forward. Again, that's really what we're looking at within the Department of Justice. So that's 3 departments so far that are relevant to immigration reform. The last department I want to cover is the Department of State. And within the budget, it's counted as Department of State and other international programs. This is more of the work that we're understanding in terms of addressing the root causes of immigration. Now, the State Department and other international programs will receive $63.5 billion, so even bigger than the budget of Homeland Security. But unfortunately, not unfortunately, but as I mentioned earlier, which was mentioned in the Associated Press article, but not really 100% accurate, is that $861 million will be preferably sent off in 2022 to help address matters of corruption and to help strengthen the economic development in different Central American countries. Now, the thing to remember is that this is just the first step. Within this budget, it is a commitment of 4 years to send off $4 billion to Central America. I believe I remember seeing an article before saying that that was really their goal. It was just not understood if they were going to do it over time or if along these lines, in a lump sum or over time. And it seems that they are going with this 4-year commitment. To be seen if it's going to be committed 100%, especially if Congress has to approve this, to just kind of give the word for word explanation of what this money is for. It is to strengthen host government accountability, to bolster service delivery and security by curtailing endemic corruption, preventing violence, reducing poverty, and expanding economic development opportunities. So again, it is about addressing the root causes, the reasons of why immigrants are leaving their host countries to then come to the United States. And that's something I really want to highlight when we're talking about this, about these root core reasons of why people are leaving, because just imagine what would force you to have to decide to leave your entire life, your livelihood, everything that you've known from your country, right? If you were to have to be forced to leave the U.S., people don't just decide out of the blue that, hey, I'm just going to leave my country. I'm going to leave my family. I'm going to leave my friends. I'm going to leave everything that I've known behind and go to a country where I don't know anyone or may not know anyone, might not be able to speak the language there, be able to communicate, and possibly not get help. It's a big choice, and it's not done lightly. People are forced to leave their homes for different reasons, whether it's violence, whether it's inability to actually have opportunity to better your life and the life of your children. These are the reasons why people are leaving, and that's what this part of the budget is really focusing on. And on top of that, this is actually a large sum of the $63.5 billion for the State Department. It is over $10 billion will be going towards humanitarian assistance to vulnerable people abroad. And they gave some examples, which includes the more obvious, which is refugees and conflict victims. So this is really about helping them have more opportunities to be safe and then to potentially come to the U.S. So over $10 billion for this kind of a program, which I think is a very good amount of money, considering that's about 1/6 of the budget for the State Department and other international programs. So this is more or less the highlights of the new budget, which President Biden has sent off to Congress yesterday. We still have to wait to hear the reactions of Congress. Of course, you can expect conservative members to be very against a lot of the spending that's included in this bill, while certain Democrats will be on board. We are generally worried about more conservative Democrats. Unfortunately, a U.S. representative in Florida passed away recently, which also put the House majority for Democrats in more peril. I believe their majority now sits at 7 rather than 8. And to understand how important that is, just look at the Senate, where really any member of the Democratic Party there, if they decide that they don't want to support a certain bill, for whatever reason, can hold up the whole process. Now in the House, you're running into this risk where more conservative, essentially Republican-minded Democratic representatives will be able to hold up all progress in the House. So for those of us who may have felt a little bit too comfortable with the really small margin of the majority in the House, I think this is a wake-up call, really, is that we are nearing very dangerous territory when it comes to the majority in the House. I do want to highlight that there are a few U.S. House representatives who are of the Democratic Party who are within these border states that are being affected by the crisis at the border, who are already saying that they would not support certain comprehensive immigration reform if it doesn't have border security. And so this is really putting into peril a lot of the things that we've been taking for granted in terms of relying heavily on this Democratic majority. My advice has always been that both parties need to be held accountable. Republicans make it at least a little bit easier by being very upfront about their displeasure with immigrants and whether they're documented or undocumented. And my concern has always more so been towards the Democratic Party, where on the face value, they will say that they support you and that they'll fight for whatever bills that are needed to help the community. And yet, when it comes time to act, you'll see this very big division in terms of ideology, where some will be on board and others will run to gain Republican supporters, even though they're a Democrat. with the excuse again that they want to be reelected and that if they're not elected, a Republican will take their place. And it's a lot of politics, which is unfortunate because you are playing with the lives of millions and millions of people in this country who just want to live in peace. So this again will just this was going to be a rather short session, a short show this week. Not much has happened on the end of reforms. If I were to go through them, it'd be essentially the same as last week. The U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, there's been no progress at all. We've not heard much about it, whether or not it will be going through committee. In terms of the DREAM Act, the standalone bill for only Dreamers, that has not gone anywhere, unfortunately, in the Senate. And as I covered last week, the Senate does not have immigration reform as a priority as it comes back from its recess today, technically today. So we will have to be very vigilant on what happens going forward because they have 3 bills in the Senate: the DREAM Act of 2021, the American Dream and Promise Act of 2021, and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act of 2021. There are 3 bills just sitting in the Senate. 2 of them were passed by the House last month in March. And so still, as I said, they've not said or given an update on whether or not they're going to be reviewing any of these 3 bills anytime soon. We'll most likely see it as I expect that once the border crisis starts to calm down over the summer, probably nearing August, we may see a revival of enthusiasm to try and address immigration. It just was very bad timing on our end, and the fact that the Biden administration was not prepared for really an inevitable influx of immigrants coming to this country. It was to be expected that many people would come, especially during the springtime, and yet they were not prepared to address something which now has become a crisis of really their own creation, but also from policies stemming from the Trump administration. So there's faults on many hands, and it's really on the Biden administration now to address this crisis in time for us to also push immigration reform. This is really the only excuse that Republican representatives and conservative Democrats have to block any kind of reform. So the sooner this is resolved, I'm sure the sooner we'll have some kind of movement. And for those of you who are curious about the Republican comprehensive reform proposal, yeah, it's as I expected. We've not heard anything about it since the 2 bills were voted on and passed in the House. I do honestly believe that it was more as a distraction, just to see if the public would be swayed to the Republican side and their argument for more enforcement with just a little carrot and stick to bait us into it. We'll see what happens with it if they actually do want to take it more seriously and propose it as an actual legislative bill. I would imagine it had to happen within the next few weeks, if not month, where we can finally have something written with all the details for it. There was also talks about going through reconciliation for the next relief bill, which would be an infrastructure bill, to include some kind of legislation within it for immigration reform. Unfortunately, as I had mentioned, the House is only at a 7 representative majority, and our more conservative, essentially Republican Democrats are already signaling that they would not support this kind of a bill if it has immigration reform that does not include border enforcement. So we are going to have to wait and see what comes up out of this. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of clear indication right now. People are just coming back from their congressional recess in the middle of a crisis. I'll remind you about that. And we'll have to see where this goes. As always, I really try and highlight the need to take action now. So please, we're always going to mention this. There's the campaign website where we have steps, clear steps on how you can find out who your representative is and how to call them if you want their direct number or direct email for their office. Otherwise, if you know who your representative is, feel free to call this general number. It's for the congressional switchboard. They will connect you directly to your representative's office as long as you give them their name. And again, this takes less than 5 minutes. You can call as many times a day as you want, or throughout the week, however you want to spread it out. But please, it means a lot for the movement because all of these calls are recorded and the issues are tallied up to see what's important. So if we can continue to at least fight for comprehensive immigration reform during this time where representatives are scared, then they will have no excuse that when this border crisis is no longer a public issue, to be able to push forward comprehensive immigration reform that helps all over 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country, as well as dreamers, TPS holders, agricultural workers, all of us, because that is the most important piece that we need, as well as addressing the immigration system as a whole. As I'm saying, we have a lot to work on in terms of immigration court backlogs, asylum backlogs. There's so much that needs to be done for the immigration system to function in a more humane way. And the only way we can do that is through comprehensive immigration reform that helps all immigrants, regardless of their immigration status. But for now, I think that's really where we're going to end it. It's a very short program this week, so I hope that's fine with you. Tomorrow, we'll be back in Spanish, and then the following week, we'll see really be able to provide a better update in terms of these reforms now that the Senate will be back from its recess. But for now, as always, thank you for being a part of this show. It means a lot to me, and I'll see you next week. So for now, bye-bye.